All right, so today I'm going to talk about managing our SolidWorks Composer content within Enterprise PDM. We're going to have a look at a number of different things with respect to that. And to be sure, we are now halfway through our sessions. There's a nice session by Chris Narveson at 1:30. He's going to be talking about some of the content that he's been working on in action with respect to Composer. So, and then there's a hands-on session. Hopefully you have access to that one for creating some of the content that I showed yesterday afternoon, as well as some interactive content stuff for some hands-on. And then the animator one is actually a fairly interesting one. I was talking to the presenter about that one last night. She said she was going to be, they have two people doing the presentation on Wednesday, and they're going to compare and contrast Animator and SolidWorks. Things that you can do in Animator, things you can do in Composer, as far as what's available for which and what's the right time to use which product. So that'll be an interesting session. All right, so have we ever gone through this particular scenario? You've gone through and created a series of different images within Composer, and you go to update that model, and you come to a point of Composer does all the trick that he wants to update all the images and such, and at the end of the day, we just lost all of our content. What the heck just happened here? The key to making sure that this works properly is really setting up an appropriate file management strategy within 3D Composer, SolidWorks Composer. And once we've done that, the updates, they should just work for us if we've done some good setups. So we're going to first talk about a little bit of this workflow, our file management strategies. Then we'll head into some workflow. We'll touch on a bunch of stuff with respect to Enterprise PDM, some code that I've put together to help assist with the tools that are available between the two products. And then I've thrown in at the end, we'll see where the timing is, a couple of Composer tricks that I find useful, and things that you're not necessarily considering coming out of the box of Composer. So we'll get started with our workflows to get started. We'll have a look at some of those basic workflows. First off, we're talking about Enterprise PDM's integration. So it's actually important to understand which product needs to be installed compared to whether or not it should actually be installed. We provide an access to both the Composer product for install as well as a SolidWorks importer. And naturally, the initial instinct is to install that SolidWorks importer. However, that's actually not required when you install the product. So if you have SolidWorks on the machine that you're working with, it actually works out better to not include the importer. We'll actually use that seat of SolidWorks. This is in the case, the importer is really only useful when SolidWorks is not available to us on that particular seat of SolidWorks Composer. An eye chart of a graph that we basically have on our support site. Basically, it gives some rundowns of which products, of file formats the SolidWorks files bring in based on the Composer version. What this says in a nutshell is if you get a product that's the X release, then that's going to support that particular version of SolidWorks as well. With SolidWorks Composer coming out, that's no longer going to be an issue. Those are going to be matched up, so this eye chart will simply go away for the most part. Now I recognize that not every one of you is using the latest and greatest version of SolidWorks like I've got on my machine. There are reasons why you're not going to that latest and greatest version. You can actually have two separate versions of the two products on the machine. we're actually using an add-in in SolidWorks to load the files into Composer. So you actually have the opportunity to have the older versions of SolidWorks that you're running in production, as well as combined with the latest version of Composer. Those are actually independent because we are just simply using the add-in functionality to load in the Composer content that's required. So we actually can get away with having some older versions. And in fact, I actually recommend that typically when we're working with a lot of some older versions of SolidWorks models, because we won't have to checkpoint and upgrade the product, the files as they're being loaded into the importer version of SolidWorks. It actually does that checkpoint forward, rebuilds the feature tree, and then captures the data. If we avoid that, we can actually speed up the process of translation. So quite often I try to recommend it. The importer's a last-ditch requirement if you don't have SolidWorks at all available to us. And that happens from time to time. Another thing that's very key to this, and one of the items that we have that actually pointed to that particular video that I showed, is to set up a default document properties for Composer. And quite often in my setup, I have included a merge file into one act per part. What that does is it merges the feature tree that you see, or the assembly tree, such that the solid bodies, you don't actually see the names of the solid bodies, which from a Composer author's point of view, I don't really need to know the name of the last feature that modified that body. I really only need the name of the part. So merging the file actually helps us out with editing and creating our tables and other operations. Now, with the latest version of Composer that's currently available for us to download, V6 R2013X, that we actually have an option to set up a SolidWorks option. You can actually choose the different CAD system that you're importing for, and those settings will be set for you automatically, which certainly helps with consistency. But the idea here is by setting it in the default documents properties, then you know that your settings are going to be consistent for every file that gets imported into Composer. So we're going to be looking at this bench grinder. I used it yesterday a couple of times, just as an idea of how we might work with these workflows. And quite often what I find is that a workflow consists of converting the files into Composer, and then the operations, the content that you're creating typically is defined for user manuals, maybe assembly documentation, maybe parts catalogs. And quite often the images that you create are consistent for one product, from one document type to another. So as all my user manual images are going to have a fairly consistent shape, size, and such. So I might create all of those for one document. I might create all of the tech illustrations in a separate Composer file. And rather than having all of the illustrations and all the images that I've created all located in a single document, that actually ends up having a document that's got 40, 50, 100, 200 images, and it starts to become unwieldy, much like having an assembly that's just got too many components. I mean, it starts to become, I should actually say rather, it's more equivalent to too many configurations in an assembly. So I've got there are some various workflows that I've seen typically, and quite often that first common workflow is to have this monolithic file. One file that I've taken and I've simply opened the file into Composer, saved it off to do my work, and so you end up with a separate SMG file for every document. The basic workflow then, and I've put these into boxes. The states are, you could, if you will, your workflow states the action, maybe your transition from one workflow state to another. But you've got your CAD model, and on the check-in, you'll have some kind of of a task or a dispatch routine that would automatically create that SMG file and then create the reference back to it. And that create reference, typically from a manual point of view, is to do a copy paste as reference within Enterprise PDM. Now, that first scenario, and the one that I see most often with our customers, is that they would simply create these SMG files directly from that CAD model. And anytime they want to go update those files, they actually have to go back to the CAD model and update them. It actually is a fairly lengthy process to update. If I've got 5, 10, 15 different SMG files I have to update against a given assembly, doing that for every one of them is actually fairly lengthy. So I point this out. This is a very common one that I see getting started. And of course, getting those updates to be done, that if we do it more than 1 or 2 times, you end up saying, forget it, I'm not going to update. I'll wait until I'm done with all my engineering and I'll work with it at that point. Again, it's a scenario that doesn't help us. It doesn't really help us to take advantage of getting a parallel process set up within our workflows. The second scenario that I typically see going to the next one is actually a scenario that I use. All of the sales reps around the country, around the world, actually use, and for the primary reason, it is fast. It's a lot faster process to accomplish. To have a single baseline SMG file and simply use it. Take a copy of it and use it in a different scenario and then use the update. So the basic process still remains the same, where I've created my composer file, I've done an initial check-in to create that initial SMG file. But the author then comes in the gold box, takes a copy of that baseline SMG file and then works from that, renames it, does the work he needs to for the parts list, for the manufacturing document, whatever the particular document images that they need, they would create those separate references. Now, when I'm working with this in Enterprise PDM, that of course means I have to create once I copy it over, I simply need to set up that file reference manually for the operation so that I can still maintain the links between it and I know I can get the updates from Enterprise PDM. Now, as the model moves forward in time, then, of course, we will need to update the SMG file. And in this scenario, then, what we have the opportunity is, because we've isolated this SMG file from the authored content, this guy, if you will, is your pristine, your baseline SMG file that actually parallels the workflow or the states of that CAD model, so that at any given time the composer author can simply open up and take a copy of that SMG file to work with. And when he goes to update, he actually updates against that SMG file rather than back against the CAD model. And the benefit of that one is that now I actually don't have to have the assembly file at all, right? I don't have to go back and find it. I don't have to find the version. The only version I need to worry about is the SMG file itself. When I go to do the update, again, the assembly tree has already been set by Composer when I did that initial creation. And so this is, as I said, this is a tool that we use as demo tools, but quite honestly, this is a tool that I recommend to customers as that next step. Of course, that's only the second workflow that I see, and we'll work to the next ones. The next two I'm going to show you with some actual scenarios of what I'm talking about here. But if we take this product to the next level, we can actually consider using this guy as a project. So rather than right now the SMG file, if you will, is basically just a pack and go version of the actual content. I mean, when I want to send a SolidWorks model in its corresponding drawing to someone, I set up a pack and go of that and send that off to that person. Effectively, the composer file, that SMG file, is simply a pack and go version. Now, if I break that out into its individual components, I have what's called an SMG XML file, or a product, and that represents the actual assembly itself. And then there's additional content with respect to all the views that are created, scenarios, or the timeline that you might create, as well as a project. Now, the benefit of this guy is, much like that last workflow, you're creating now an SMG XML file that corresponds to the CAD model. It's the same thing, but I've simply broken it out into its individual item. Now, much like a SolidWorks drawing, I would create a project file, and that project simply points to that SMG XML file. So all I have to do is point at it, much like a drawing pointing to an assembly. I can point to that SMG XML file. Not only that, but I can actually point to many SMG XML files. So I can include different assemblies, different sub-assemblies. I can include parts that the engineering doesn't really care about, but I care about for tooling, for manufacturing purposes. I can add those things that the engineer hasn't necessarily included. Even if we could include additional fittings and other items, again, things that are not necessarily in the CAD model that engineering is working on. And as I said, these are all separate models, so as we go forward, that core SMG file, that SMG XML file, does get updated. But the cool part about this is the project, the next time myself as the author opens that SMG XML actually gets updated. I mean, it comes in automatically because it's an external reference at this point. I'm updating that external reference, and then the project opens up. So we're all set. It's much like a drawing. When you open up the drawing on a modified assembly, you're going to see the new version of that assembly in the drawing. So it's a very similar kind of thing. It's a nice variation on the use of the projects. Now, it's a product that you can certainly use throughout this time. Yes, quick question.
Two quick questions. Is the SMG project files on the far right, are they SMG file types, or are they SMG?
No, they're actually, so once we've broken it out, all these files, if we were to open it up in an XML editor, you'll find that they're simply XML files. We use those extensively. In fact, I've taken advantage, and there are folk groups around the world that have taken advantage of the fact that it is an XML file, and to push data directly into that file without having to manually add data or pull together components and so on. So it's actually a fairly, because it's XML format, it's very easy to write code to manipulate that.
Does Enterprise see those the file references between those two automatically?
In this case, no, it doesn't recognize that, and so that's where we have to have some have some tools that help us out. So it certainly is a starting point. Right now, those project references simply you would be doing a copy paste as reference. So, all right, let's have a quick look at what I'm talking about in here. All right, so I'm going to open up my bench grinder, and in this bench grinder model, I'm going to simply save this out as a product. And just working here. We'll call it products, and save this guy as an SMG XML file. Now we can write some code. We can have some things done so that file gets created, and I'll see that a little bit later. A tool that actually saves those files directly from SolidWorks as SMG XML files. So if I close this file now, what we see in the folder, I just created a products folder, is a series of files that were created. There's a geometry file, a scenario file. A scenario is basically your timeline, your video timeline within Composer. You've got a view file that represents all of the views that you've created, the changes to the baseline. And then, of course, the baseline is this SMG XML file. The view file and the scenario file, actually, I don't need. I can toss those. Those are not relevant to this. The definition of the assembly is in that SMG XML file, and the actual tessellated data is stored in that geometry file. So we have those two files. That represents my bench grinder. Now, if I go back in here, I can go ahead and create a new project. If you're looking at Composer, you'll find that there is only one document type you can create. That's a project. So it stands to reason that the authors of Composer wanted us to simply create these projects on a regular basis. So let me go ahead and capture that folder, go in here, and we'll just leave it as, well, let's do bench grinder project. So what happens then is that he automatically goes and says, what kind of, let's add some products to it. And I'll just go ahead and choose that SMG XML file to be added in here. And we'll go ahead and show that guy. So straight away I have access to my document, and the nice thing about this is, because it is an external reference, if I've got a number of these files put together, we actually can do very similar to SolidWorks. We can actually have a lightweight version. Unless that model is actually being shown, he's not going to be loaded into memory. So you can actually simplify some things. If you've got a fairly complex assembly, you can bring in different sub-assemblies into your model, into your project, and they will only be loaded when you need them for the view that you have activated. So it's a nice side feature to the process. Now, one of the things that you might do with Composer is to maybe select something and change its color. But once I've changed that color, maybe I want to set the neutral state. Now, the neutral state is the state of a given property, whether it's a location or the property of where what it looked like when in the CAD system. Basically, that's the concept of a neutral state. Now, because I asked to set this to be neutral within the project's like, dude, I'm looking at this as an external reference. This isn't the document that you're working in. So it's not allowing it. That's what you see here. So I can't actually make a change to that. I can't apply the change. I can always say, when I create my view, I can save that view, and that property change will be there. It's just not the neutral property. And I'm okay with that. And quite often, personally, operationally, I try not to ever set the neutral state of any of my components, of any property. And the reason for that is when I go back to update out of the CAD system, those neutral states that I applied will be gone, because Composer sees those as coming from the original CAD file. All right, so how can I change that then? If I go ahead and close this project, I can go into the product itself and open the XML file directly, at which point, this is the baseline model. I can actually update the properties that I have in here if I wanted to, and go in, set this guy, change the color to black again, and set the neutral state. So now that neutral state is set. Actually, let me change that to a different let's use the aluminum, just so that it was for grins here. And we will set the neutral properties for all the components, for all the items. Actually, let's do it this way. All right, so now when I go to save, open up my bench grinder project again, which is sitting here. Oh, I didn't save it. That's good. I can always add additional products to the system. And here's the notion that you see that it's loaded as a Z. There's a little Z there. I can't really see it, but that's what it's supposed to be. But we can see that the aluminum comes across into the project. So I have access to that data, and it can be updated. And so the idea, the concept that I'm saying is I can create a number of different projects, and I'll have them all point to the same XML file. And when I update that baseline XML file, then all of these other projects, when I go to open them, will be updated for me.
Will that update still work if you hadn't set neutral properties on that? Just change it to...
No, because when I set I have to set the neutral properties in the core file in order for it to propagate forward, because otherwise Composer will save that in a view file. It's not going to be saved with the XML file. That's the difference between these two documents. The view and the scenario, the SCE file, are simply files that contain the changes from the neutral state, and that SMG XML file is the neutral state. All right, moving forward. So I mentioned the version 2 was something that quite a lot of the application engineers, the sales team use around the world. In the past year or so, I started using this workflow for my own demos and working into this. Again, it's another form of a workflow that, again, I recommend for you, the users of Composer, the authors. So again, we're creating that baseline SMG file. This is a very consistent scenario. In fact, it helps us to keep a separation between what's going on in engineering and what's going on with Composer as an authoring tool. We can create the project, save it as an SMG file. But what I'm doing is I'm actually opening up Composer and then going in and saying, all right, I want to merge a particular SMG file into a new SMG file. So it's all self-contained. The last scenario, the last workflow I talked about, you have all these separate files. And it's much like a drawing, it has a lot of different files that it's referencing. But I'm an author. I'm not necessarily as organized as an engineer. So I need one document. I'm going to work with that. Okay, that's just me. I don't know. So this scenario allows me to have the best of workflow 2 and the best of workflow 3, where I can create that baseline SMG file, but I can still update it. I can still have a number of different assemblies in my document, and yet it's a single document. I will update against an SMG file, but I can have a number of different assemblies within the document. So let's have a look at what I'm talking about here. So let's say I'm in Composer, and I want to start off with my bench grinder. So I'm going to, let me filter on SMG files so we don't get confused. And I'm going to take this bench grinder, and I'm going to simply merge that into a new document. And what that allows me to do now is to I now have a scenario where the bench grinder actually shows up as a child to the root document. Okay? So if I had opened up that bench grinder on its own, you'd see the name of the bench grinder at the root level. What I can now do is open perhaps, and I did this yesterday afternoon, is to add this pillar, and I'm going to merge that into the current document. And we see now that we have two separate models in in place here, and we can just simply move it around and work with it. Again, this all gives me the opportunity to have a document that represents, I'm going to call it sales, to have two different items. This pillar is one thing for maybe a sales thing. Maybe I'm adding safety glasses, maybe I'm adding tooling, maybe I'm adding other kinds of things. But now I have the opportunity to say, all right, I'm going to do an assembly select of the one of the nodes, and I'm going to simply update to a given SMG file. And so I can actually update just that portion of the assembly within my document. So it makes for updates to be really nice and clean. I can have multiple assemblies. If I had done this in one of the first two workflows, and I had added this pillar into that workflow where the bench grinder was at the top level, I would actually lose the pillar. The pillar would go away, and I'd be stuck. I'd have to put all the extra components that I just placed in there back into the assembly, back into the document. With this process, I don't have to do that. It's already done for me.
So when does it go? So if you update, do it the other way. If you update the grinder, you lose the pillar.
Exactly. If I had opened up the grinder directly and then add the pillar, it's actually, now Composer sees it as a node underneath the top level of the root. But I'm updating the root node, and so he sees that as it's just simply a component that doesn't exist in this top level. So as a result, it gets tossed.
This keeps them on the same level.
This keeps them at separate levels.
So you built an assembly essentially.
Right. I'm assembling in situ.
Right. So
Yeah.
you control.
So I've got a couple of customers who have assemblies that are too big to load into SolidWorks. They'd never do it in SolidWorks. They have a very top level assembly that really just places concepts in situ, but they were never able to actually bring those things together until recently with some of the features in SolidWorks these days. But what they can do within Composer is actually take those primary subassemblies and pull them together and actually put them in such a way that they can see and do some checks and balances at the top level if they wanted to. So Composer really does give us that access. Yeah, sorry, in the back first.
So I really like this workflow because the product and the project files always make all those thumbnail images
Yes.
about every single view that you have.
Yes.
I don't think there's a way to turn that off, right?
No.
Okay, so the key here is to use assembly selection mode on each individual
Right.
other SMG file.
Correct.
Every single time you update.
Yeah, and you can tell you're in assembly selection mode when there's a blue square around outline. You can have that. If you're not in assembly selection mode, you can hit the Alt key and get the same thing. I'm just holding Alt key, Alt select that node, and you're all set. All right, so that's the idea behind that workflow. It really gives us a nice way of working with it. I see the common one. I see a faster updates by having a Spaceline SMG file. But this last scenario that I'm talking about, it really is more flexible for us as the author. And quite honestly, I recommend it for just about anyone I can work with. Oops. So again, we've gone through a handful of workflows. Let's change gears to the other half of this presentation discussion. And now that we have some ideas about those workflows, it really is important to understand those workflows to get an idea about how the process works before we even talk about managing those files, right? We need to understand exactly what's going on, who's doing what to who. And of course, managing Composer files can be any which way. Who knows where we're going with those documents. So I have a handful of different little scenarios that you might look to, that you have something that's fairly easy, something that's a little more difficult, and then we'll go with most difficult on the last one. So, all right, so let's have a look at that easier strategy. And quite honestly, it's doing some very basic things within EPDM to help us out. We can add, using the registry settings, add the HTML plugin DLL in the registry to allow us to preview our SVG files that we might be creating. So today's browsers, all of today's browsers support the rendering of HTML, and so the HTML plugin here for EPDM is supported, but you have to go into the registry to make that change. And while I realize you can't read it, it's basically in the HKey local machine under software, SolidWorks. It's basically under the PDMWorks enterprise key of HKey local machine. And I simply added a .svg file type, and I copied the entry from the .html entry. So by doing that, that automatically allows us to have access to previewing our SVG files that we're creating within Enterprise PDM. All right, so once again, right back to the start, it's very clear that we need to sort out, make sure that the workflow gets put into place. That baseline one that I recommended, that workflow 4 is the one that we're showing here, is certainly the tool by which I recommend the use of the workflow. So now the question is, how do we accomplish that with respect to Enterprise PDM? And so let me do this. You're just going to show it anyway, aren't you? Yeah, all right, that's fine. So of course, I mean, if I'm working in Enterprise PDM, and these are, I'm going to do, it's going to be fairly basic, of course. I've added some references to the SMG files, the various types that I wanted. Some of the key items in here, I added a documentation, and then all of this is based off of the default workflow, the default vault that comes in. But a couple of things that I've added in addition to the standard is I've added all of the file types. Out of the box, you have just a handful of the file types that Composer provides, but as a way of making it more complete, I actually had to add all the additional file types, including SVG files, including SMG geom, SMG SCE, project, and view files. So, and of course, as part of that, let's see. So those are the files, right? So I added those into the section where it allows us to automatically add them to the vault when those files get created, so that I can at least see them in the vault during the course of that operation. Now, to be sure, by adding these concepts, adding the data cards, we are allowed to now have a basic workflow. Now, quite often, the easy way is, of course, I've just simply added files to the system so that now I can include them, have the basic workflow. I have access to checking them in, and going through state changes and all that great stuff that you would expect. However, this is not an automated kind of a process. It really is not. Right now, without anything out of the box, you're left to working with performing operations such as a copy, using the copy and then paste as reference. If I go back up to the grinder itself that I referenced earlier. Whoops, where did it go? It's not going to let me do it across the... No, all right, that's fine. So I really don't have a way of setting up the references. I mean, in the same folder, I can do the copy paste as reference with respect to EPDM. And that all works out relatively straightforward. So quite often I see folks either working outside of EPDM with the composer files, or I actually see them working, putting them into the file folder. A lot of this is really just setting up a good clean workflow with the authors compared to the engineers. So, and by doing that, you have the ability to set up a nice clean workflow, as well as the ability to expand into additional automation that we'll get into here next, with having more of a difficult kind of a solution. So in this particular scenario, then, what I've done is I've actually taken advantage of the SolidWorks task add-in. All right. So to date, if I wanted to create these SMG files, I would be going to the assembly file and opening it into SolidWorks, opening it into Composer, and doing the work. But we know that we're using SolidWorks to do the conversion anyway. So let's take advantage of the task add-in and let it do the trick of creating the files that we want. Now, within this image basically shows taking the task add-in and take the file output details, and in the main routine of that advanced scripting options, we've actually loaded in the Composer add-in, and by doing that, that allows us to then, when the file save occurs, it's simply going to save the SMG file out, because the Composer add-in is already loaded into SolidWorks, that gets run by the task add-in. The key to it, however, is to make sure that you're pointing to the right document, the right folder that has the add-in located. With the task add-in tool, I actually have to go in and update that every time I get a new release of Composer. So that's a key item with respect to using the task add-in. Finally, we've added the SMG extension so that the files can be automatically added to the vault. Now, some additional automation to this is that I added a checkbox on both the assembly card as well as on the part card. So now I have the opportunity to choose, while that guy is checked out, to say I want an SMG file for that particular document. So as an author, or as a manager, or as an engineer, I could set that value and turn it on for documentation. I mean, I don't necessarily need to have an SMG file for every assembly file, every part file that I have in my system. So I can choose, in this case, which ones I am interested in. So
you can control that button by groups too, so that only certain.
Indeed.
So text bubbles can do it.
Right. The next item that we've done here is to add an additional transition by having a secondary parallel transition from one state to the next in my workflow. It actually allows me to filter on specific conditions as to whether or not I want that item to occur. So by having that specific transition, I can convert the model files to Composer files based on whether or not that flag has been turned on. If it's not even an assembly file or a part file, it won't go through this transition. It'll go through the other transition states. So I have a little bit more control over exactly what's going on within that document. So I've added that into my workflows. If I open it up here, I've got my own version of a workflow where I've got my initial state approval. So I've got my past approval as a parallel state. And if I look at the conditions that I've set up, I've got this model for SMG, so it's looking for that, and based on that, it's going to perform some operations. I can have it create a given document directly. All right, so we'll get into some of those other items here shortly here. So with that, by doing all of this, we actually have that scenario where we can move the documents from one to the next. We've set up a nice workflow. We're adding some automation, so we can then move on forward with our document and have a look at some of the tools that are available to us. Now, some of these tools, because we've been working forward with it, now we're actually looking at automating the actual process of converting files. And one of the things that we have to turn to with Enterprise PDM is actually leveraging the Enterprise Sync tool, which is a separate tool from Composer, but is one that will help us to assist in the creation of these SMG files. So in this particular case, I've set up a dispatch routine that allows us to create a file, and within this, I'm actually going to pull up a short little video of what I created with this. Let me pull it over. Now what's happening is this is the tool that we have for Composer, for Enterprise Sync. It's basically setting up a batch file. The user would interact with the document, set the primary conditions. In this case, we're creating one that creates an SVG file. So I can take all of the SMG files and create take an SMG file and create all the SVGs of all the views directly out of Composer. In that particular case, I can create one that says convert the CAD models into SMG files, or even into the SMG XML files, if that's what I want. By using that tool, I can do just that. So
you can with the sync tool, you can create the original SMG, you can create SVGs from all the views.
Oops, let me stop that. Let me pause that for a moment here. Say that again.
So with that sync tool, you can also create the original SMG instead of CAD, right?
That's right.
You can also get an existing SMG, export all the views to an SVG.
Right.
Are there any other file types that you can export?
You can export to, you can create all the views, much like the high-res workshop.
Okay.
But the idea behind this is that now I can do this in an automated manner.
Sure.
I don't have to babysit it to create all my views out of my document. I can create a dispatch routine that generates all the images that I need for one or more SMG files. So it gives me some tools by which I can start to add some automation to my process. I actually ran the wrong video for this. That's cool. That's all right. That wasn't the last one. Let's run this video. Same thing. We're creating SVG files. In this particular case, that's right. I can choose, if I wanted to, I could generate both of them at once. So maybe I want to have, and you saw that there was a block, so I can actually choose specific view orientations, so I can actually work with those, or point to a particular view file. So I've created a new action within the dispatch, and I'm putting it onto a menu command, and simply going over and edit and launching. In this case, I'm launching Composer, but I actually have to have the Enterprise Sync license in order for this command line to work. But I'm simply using that particular batch file that's coming out of Enterprise Sync in order to define what it is what the process is that we're operating on. So back over in Enterprise PDM, I've got a model, I've got a scissor lift that I've performed, I've got a menu item that I can now create the images, and you can see that it's now generating the various views. There were two separate views in that particular document, so let me go back over here. No, I can't catch it. So we can see that we have now two separate views in the document, and they've been added because I've added the ability for the viewing of the SVG files using the HTML plugin. They're automatically added to the vault, and I can start working with those. Now, to be sure, the drawback right now is that I can create those images, I can add them to the vault, or I can have that same tool render them and put them outside the vault if I wanted to. It's really, naturally you have the choice when you're setting up that dispatch and the enterprise sync routines. If I want them in the vault, now I got to consider do I want to set them as, do I want to have references back to the source SMG files or not? So that's where we start to look at other items. Now, a completely separate tool, one that I've written, one that I find a lot of our customers have desires for, is the ability to take meta properties and push meta properties into their composer files. Now, sources of meta properties are not just the custom properties in your SolidWorks models, but it may be coming from EPDM. You've got your project information, maybe it's from a ERP system or wherever it might be coming from. We want to push some of that metadata into the product here. So one of the things I've done then is to create a tool. I'm getting the right folder here. Yeah, that works. I created a simple tool that allows me to go in and select a particular, there we go. I can select a given SMG file, and let me go up. Grab an SMG file. I've got one that I loaded without any metadata into it. So what happens is I'm actually opening up this file into Composer in the background, leveraging the API of Composer to load the assembly tree into the document. So I've got this guy in here now. And of course it's going to crash on me. That didn't crash earlier, but now it will. That's fantastic. Prototype code, that's what it is. There, now it's reacting. All right, so I've got my add-in. Or my models, if I select on them, I only have their actor name that's located with it. Now I want to import the metadata. I have two choices in this particular tool. I can set up an XML file that represents the assembly tree with the actual paired up metadata and the properties themselves. But what I'm going to do here, what I've done in EPDM, is to create an export rule to export my Composer data. So I've literally set up this export rule so that I can create the XML file, create a separate XML file based on some aliases that I've created, so that I can define a description straight from the data card, as well as being able to access that model for SMG flag that's part of this. So I've got those, and if I go back to my workflow, as I go into the actions, we see that I've got an export data, and of course it's going to run the particular export. And thinking about this transition, I actually don't need this only run with, because that transition is only going to run with those files anyway, so I'm all set. It doesn't need it. So it's all right. It's all good. All right, so having previously run this, the transition, I've got the XML export file. It generated the bill of materials as an XML file. And so what I can do then is come back into my tool and select that particular file. Grab my XML file and open it, and it will it pulls in all of the nodes in that file, the various information that was in the bill of materials table for that particular component or for that assembly. And when I go through and perform the import, it literally will merge those two together and push that back into the original SMG file, so that now what I have is, if I select, we see that these are the meta properties that were generated. If I select any one of these now, it's not just the actor name, but it's also the metadata has been added to the file. So we can pull these together. I'm adding the data out of EPDM and pushing it into Composer for use in my tables, for use with notes and other items, of course. So this really helps us out. We can work with additional items. Now, I wrote this code. I provided it. I do have it available for use, but if you would, as a customer, please go to your reseller and ask them to talk with me, because I'd rather them work with you directly on this code, as opposed to coming from myself. They'll be able to support you locally for the product.
And that's for any actors inside an SMG, regardless of...
It actually is for any actor. We actually could go so far as to include. You could go as far as adding in annotations and images and all kinds of great stuff in there if you want, because of course an actor is an actor in Composer, so it doesn't matter whether it's a view or if it's an annotation or a component. So you could quite honestly add those as well. Yes. It's actually a standalone product right now. The standalone tool. It's Composer. It's a meta property tool that I have. Yeah. I'll just call it that. And it is not. Yeah, they'll have to come to me directly on that one. So, yeah.
Now, the custom properties for native SolidWorks will come in, or can come in with those models.
They can. The custom properties can come into Composer directly if you have custom properties in SolidWorks.
If you have, yeah.
In this particular case, I actually chose to turn off the meta properties so that I could show this concept. So.
Or this comes from a different source or additional.
And quite often it does. I mean, I see Composer authors leveraging what's in the engineering data, and that's not always what they want to show to the end customer. So the model names may change to save, to prevent the innocent from being hurt, I guess. All right, so we've had a look at some of the things that Enterprise Sync can help us to do. It helps us to enable some of the automation that we'd like to gain with Enterprise PDM. It allows us to provide some automation of our tasks. And we saw a tool that I've put together that simply helps us merge metadata together from one or more sources within our organization. All right. Now, to be sure, we've gone through each of these different steps as far as how we might go with the process, but I actually have one last one that I've created, and It works based off this basic workflow again, where we want to have. I put in here a file reference for everything. Right now, that file reference is a manual process. I have to do the copy paste as reference for everything in order to maintain that connectivity. So the only way I could figure to sort that out is actually to have a task add-in that actually does it. The SolidWorks task add-in allows us to do it between the CAD model and the SMG file, but I'm doing all this other great stuff with creating images. I'm creating a separate copy and merging SMG files in. I want to have some references between the two and have some of those things taken care of for me. So what I did was I created a task add-in for EPDM that helps us to leverage the Enterprise Sync tool to then create the composer files or publish out the images that are coming out of Composer. So let me show that video. And of course, I ended up running the video earlier without desiring to. So
We didn't even notice.
you didn't notice because you didn't know what you were looking for. So again, the tool here leverages the fact that I can create an arbitrary process, whether I'm copying from a CAD model, taking the CAD model to SMG, or in this case, creating an SVG file from the views that are already in that particular composer file. I generate and save the file, the definition of what I wanted to use. In this case, I'm saving it as SolidWorks task. And then I head over to Enterprise PDM, and in my task, I create a new task. SolidWorks task. SolidWorks to SMG in this particular case. I select the Composer add-in. And if you've used the SolidWorks task add-in, I've actually mimicked some of the things. So I can create a menu command very much like the task add-in to allow us to have direct control, manual control over the task. I can choose where that's going to be used. I can choose the batch file that I just created. So I can create my task. And of course, choose where the file is going to occur. So I've added some things. Again, very similar to the last tool that I showed. This task add-in is really right now a prototype. I've put it together for SolidWorks World here. But the idea is that we can choose to add this thing. We can apply a reference back to any files that were generated. So of course, we're going to add the success and notifications. So the idea behind this, I have the option to create that reference in EPDM as I need. So I've got this the task is available. Give us an example. If I go to my bench to some safety glasses, I now have access to SolidWorks World SW to SMG file. And while that's running, of course, it takes a little bit of time before it gets going. I am having a look at the process. So in this workflow, then we've got the conditions. So the data card actually has been turned on. Add my action, my transition, and in this case, I'm going to execute a task. So the last one was performing an XML export. I'm actually going to add the task, and you'll note that it was actually just below the export of the XML. I could add some additional code to help merge some additional things in, so I can do some additional items within that transition directly. And we can see that as I check these things in, we can see that the references have been defined, and there's a clear path. So the PNG file that was generated is pointing back to the SMG file, And you can choose exactly what that is. I mean, looking at the code, you have actually some choices on how that might work. The idea here, of course, is that we can really work to generate a little bit more automation. It does require that task add-in, and quite honestly, again, it's available for us through your reseller, and I'll work with them to ensure that you can work with it. But right now it's a prototype, so there would be additional coding required on their end. But to be sure, this gives us some abilities for working with this content. So it's one of those aspects of enterprise PDM that we're going to have to take care of. Right now, I've got one reseller that is working with me on it to implement it at a customer site right now. So they're working to help me refine that product. So, all right, let me head back over to my slides here, and we see that what we're going to gain out of this is to leverage Enterprise Sync with our EPDM workflows. The custom tasks allows for remote operation. It doesn't have to operate on that machine. I can set up a dedicated server that's performing those tasks, as well as have a consistent application. Because Enterprise Sync is being used, I can define exactly what those processes are going to be, and I know that they're going to be executed in the same manner over and over again. So that's with Enterprise PDM. And indeed, I have just a couple of things that I want to point to, a couple of different little tips and tricks that I come across in the product. So this one is a tool. I've shown some things with creating views, but if I have within Composer, I actually have the ability to apply what's called a custom view. So I can actually set up scenarios where I can make the hand open, I can close the hand, I can change it into a fist if I wanted to. So you can do a lot of nice things. And what I've done with this is I've actually set up and leveraged the assembly hierarchy within here. So quite often you don't want to mess with the assembly structure with respect to some item. But with this guy, what I can do with Composer, I can drag and drop an SMG file into a given document. And what will happen is that all of those custom views that you just saw will actually come along for the ride. They'll actually be included into whatever document I just merged it into. And so now I'd have access to adding these additional items. And because I've set up the structure, I've actually moved the components around in order to have you have the end of the arm to the wrist, to the hand, out to the fingers, so that all the fingers are right at the edges. So by doing that, you've got a frames of reference. So this guy has a coordinate system, and then the coordinate system for the hand is relative to the arm, and the finger is relative to the hand. So I can make some changes fairly easily. If I look at it in Composer, then I have my bench grinder. Cool. So let me go ahead and open up that arm, merge that into the current document, and we see now that those same views have been actually included with my document. So let me shift the hand out a little bit, and with the views, we can see that we can change that guy to a pointing finger. And equally, I mentioned that there's frames of reference. So if I rotate the one item, it actually is rotating about that particular location. By setting up and actually selecting a particular node in the tree and rotating that node, you can actually affect all the components right below it because they're simply following the same frame of reference within Composer. So by setting up the assembly tree appropriately, then it helps with manipulating the components in the assembly. All right, so let me head back over here. Another one I've done is to set up alternate position views. Quite often this is a tool that you want to show within a given document. We want to show that process. So if I go ahead and open up this scissor lift into Composer, we'll see that I have the scissor lift. What I've done is I've actually taken the scissor lift at its final position. I took a copy of that. I actually copied the geometry. So in this case, let me go ahead and copy all of this geometry, and then merge it into a single object. And with that object selected, I'm going to set it to silhouette as well. So if we look at that model, now it's going to be as equally a silhouette. It's just the one object. So the idea here is that I can actually create separate copies of the same model and leverage those items. The last one is just an operational kind of thing. Sometimes I'm creating a leader line off of a note and accidentally create a second leader line. And the question is, how in the heck do I get rid of that leader line? So I'm going to go ahead and open up this gearbox then. And with this gearbox, I'll activate the parts list, and of course I've got my extra leader line. Well, as it happens, you can get rid of it because you can see this little target at the bottom corner. That's what gets rid of it. If I want to add another leader line, I simply grab that and place it back where I want to. So I can always add and remove leader lines. It's not very clear necessarily unless you go through and pick through the documentation, but it's a slick little tool to help us with adding and removing leader lines. All right, fantastic. I've got about 20 minutes for some questions and answers because I've now headed through all of my documents.
Can you run that scissor lift through an animation for us? That's what you have to.
Yep.
Yeah, just start the animation.
Yeah, let me reset this because of course it's all out of whack. Let it stop at the end here.
I like the high gauge.
Yeah, indeed. It's one of those things. I didn't have to do anything with it. All I did was I applied the dimension between the two planes. But because the references are changing, it's automatically giving me the reference. So, yes, in the back.
For the most flexible but most complex workflow, it requires the sync add-on. Does the initial workflows require
All right, so
composer integration?
So you don't. The workflows themselves, you can manage on your own without any of the additional. It's just you have to do the copy, paste, and reference. If you wanted to have the hierarchy, much like a drawing references an assembly, right? So so that would be managed. The enterprise sync helps us to add that additional automation to leverage that functionality. Yeah.
Is there an initial integration to manage composer files in?
No, no. The composer files, we've added the data cards for the core files. That comes out of the box today for Enterprise PDM. It's simply a matter of how do you incorporate those into your EPDM workflows. And so that's where I'm giving you some, by showing these scenarios, it helps us to understand how you're using Composer first before you then actually create those workflows and get things flowing correctly. I mean, with the processes and such.
I thought that was great because based on your business and what you're trying to do with that,
Right.
that makes a lot of sense for the three different
Right.
configurations.
Right.
But
Okay. Question.
Um,
All right.
How easy is it to embed videos? Like if we wanted to add silicone or adhesive in a process, and if we wanted to have a check to say, yes, I met this standard, and now I'm ready to continue the process, can you trade it so that the animation stops, do this, check for video, watch the video, and then check to make sure that you met that standard, and then it continues on?
You'd actually have to set that up external to Composer. Now there are API hooks in to allow you to run what they call a marker sequence, which is simply a segment of your video, if you want. But the checks and balances that you're asking about would have to come from an external web page or application to accommodate that. So.
Can Composer be embedded in a different program? Like if we only wanted to create videos of
Sure.
what we're doing.
Sure. In fact, that's where I used that's where I created this this tool. I've simply embedded the viewer into PowerPoint here. I personally chose as part of the options to have the toolbars and all this other stuff available to me. I could actually choose not to have it and just have the graphics window embedded. So, but quite often what I see, and we'll come to here, quite often what I see is people will render out the AVI files and work with those in that kind of scenario. I mean, because it's easiest to understand to get started. We can certainly help you get to this point. There's no question about it. So, all right, good question.
The nature of our product requires, much like that scissor jack, requires the engineers to have done a lot of analysis, predefined stages in that way.
Okay.
Discrete fixed positions based on the operation of the device.
Right.
So they've done all that work.
Yeah.
And stored them all as configurations in SolidWorks.
Sure.
Can we bring those multiple
Yeah.
configurations in?
Yeah.
Did I miss that?
You did, but you didn't. So whenever I bring in a file into Composer, I actually have the choice of bringing in a specific configuration. So that last workflow that I talk about where I'm merging documents in, I could actually merge in each of those separate configurations into the file so I can see those in my overall view. Yeah. Yeah.
So kind of the sync, when I edit my SolidWorks files, I know we were doing a basis referencing, but does that allow me to sync those models with what I have in Composer, or is it, what exactly is sync doing?
So enterprise, the term sync implies that we're synchronizing things, but in reality what it's doing is it's allowing us to convert from from the CAD file to Composer, from Composer publish out the content. Now that process from going from the CAD file to the Composer file, I have a choice of either, if it already exists, I can have it update that file if I wanted to. But because I'm creating these baseline documents, I can actually overwrite them in the workflow that I'm proposing.
Right.
So
Our big thing is we get some models, we do
Yep.
create copies of everything, so I don't want to create copies is fine, but when these change, I want to update those copies.
Right.
For the most part.
Right.
What I think was essentially gives you
It-
that ability.
It does help. It does help with that. Yes. I mean, there's work that needs to be done to help with the integration of the automation, but it does help. That's where he starts to help you get to that automation that you're looking for. Yeah. Yes.
When you brought in that pillar,
Yes.
bringing more than one
The tools I have are basically aligning plane to plane, a plane to a line, so align axes if you want, point to point kinds of things. And what it is we're simply aligning the locations of these components within. I'm not actually doing any mating whatsoever within Composer. So, and quite often that's not necessary because I'm creating a picture at the end of the day. So, quite often, yes.
Composer question. Do you have a technique for simulating motion? Making like the direction a wrench would turn kind of thing?
Right.
Technique around that?
A technique for simulating the motion?
Like showing like a still picture so it looks like...
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah, you know, you could do it a couple of different ways. One might be this this use of an alternate position, right? So I might show the starting point, the current point, and maybe put a circular arrow along that, right? So that might give you some additional ways of showing that. So, yeah. But at least with the alternate position view that I'm showing, you would see where it started from as well.
You can see it too, where an arrow is just sort of static.
Yeah, right. Here, and then we'll come back down here, yeah.
In your complex scenario,
Yeah.
the task add-in and the sync piece, I saw you make SolidWorks to SMG. I saw SMG to the deliverables of the PNG.
Right.
With sync or with an add-in, can you do the SMG to SMG, where you have the master?
Yeah, and because I made it fairly, I tried to make it as generic as possible so that the definition within Enterprise Sync, that tool, that user interface, whatever it generates coming out, that's what it would be creating that reference for. So
But will sync do that? Sync will do SMG?
It should, yeah, it should do that, yeah. Of course, I might be just made a liar here, but we'll see. Yes.
So that's the problem we have. If we have a similar model, and we have, serial numbers or whatever, but we copy the model, we change little things in it, but we want to reference it to Composer, files that we already have, but we're changing the file name. Is there a way to do that in Composer without? We talked about VAR, and they said
changing
text file.
you're changing the part files,
Yeah.
part file names.
But we want to reference it to the new part files.
Right. So, yeah, that's a challenge for Composer because he's simply looking for the part name.
Right.
And quite honestly, it's a very similar challenge for SolidWorks. I mean, if you change the part file, I mean, you have to redo things anyway, right?
Right.
So, having said that,
But you can pack and go and drawing references can be changed.
yeah, and the pack and go, and what that does, of course, is he's leveraging the fact that he knows the file structure and can actually do that work.
Right.
You'd have to put some code together to map the old to the new part numbers. It's possible. It's just you have to have some code to manipulate that XML content. So, yeah. Yes, in the back.
Two quick questions. When you import an SMG into another SMG,
Yep.
I think you covered this, but I missed it. Do the meta properties go into the second SMG?
Yes, the meta properties do come across. In fact, all the content comes across it. So if I had views in there, which is what I used for when I showed with this this arm coming into with that bench grinder, it actually brings in those views.
So even for the updates, because you're using the geometry update when you're...
I don't use the geometry update.
Oh,
I only use file update. File update does the work of merging and updating all of the geometry, all the assembly tree, as meta properties, and all that great stuff. So, yeah.
That's with multiple SMGs and the same.
Yes.
And then the other question was, I noticed you were changing the assembly structure, and that really helps for animations and whatnot.
Yes.
But I know that also, makes the updating process difficult.
Right.
What about when you update an SMG, or put an SMG into another SMG again, and you change that inserted SMG
Yeah.
assembly structure and still update constantly?
No, no. The moment you start mucking with the actual assembly underneath, the update is no longer valid. You can't expect it to work again. But there are times when you want it to work. And in fact, I had someone who was spending so much time on the SolidWorks animation, he was spending 3 weeks to generate the one animation. And I showed him how he could do it from scratch in a day for the same animation in Composer. He's like, I don't care if I can't update at that point. You just saved me 2 weeks and 4 days, and whatever weekends I might have been using at the same time. So
Question about the licensing. So if I do tasks and everything, just
Yeah.
tasks, and I run that on a server.
right.
So on the server, I have to have Composer installed on there, and if I do the sync, do I
Right.
also need sync installed on the client and there? Or
No, it would just be on that server machine. Yeah, yeah. That's part of the nice thing. You really only need one seat of Enterprise Sync once you get that all set up. It's not something that you'd be necessarily having it installed all over the place. So, and that's where having a task add-in that points it to a particular machine makes it a lot easier to work with.
But you still need the task codes. That was my question.
Sorry?
EPDM Sync still uses the task codes, the task add-in.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
specify number of machines, pick one.
Pick one. Yep, exactly. So, very good, folks. All right, fantastic. Thank you.